Thanks for joining us today. We have a fun program planned for you over caring for trees in Kansas. So my name is Cassie Homan. I'm the horticulture agent for the Post Rock District of K-State Research and Extension, and I'm here with Pallace.
Yeah, my name's Pallace Messer, and I'm the horticulture agent in the Golden Prairie District. And like Cassie said, we're talking about caring for your trees in Kansas. As horticulture agents, we really recommend that you take some time to maintain your trees so they keep in tip-top shape, and that will just provide a better situation for wildlife to have a proper environment. You'll also have some extended shade in your landscape and overall just great beauty around your home. So today some topics that we're going to be talking about include selecting the right tree for your location, also how to plant your trees, how to stake them if that's necessary at all, how to mulch your trees, and then the watering and proper fertilizing techniques.
So we're going to start off with plant selection, and the first thing you need to know when thinking about plant selection is to know your hardiness zone. So if you're a gardener or a landscaper in Kansas, you want to know what your hardiness zone is. And if you live in northwest Kansas, you're probably in a zone 5 or 6, but find a hardiness zone map and figure out your exact zone. And then when you're purchasing a tree, the recommended zone for that tree will be on the label. You also want to think about the size of the tree. If it's going to be close to your house or any other utilities, think about the final size it will be, the shape, and some other characteristics of the site, such as the moisture it receives, the light, even the soil type of your home or the landscape you're planting a tree in. We horticulturists like to say the right plant for the right place. So even if the plant is the prettiest plant you find and you love it so much, it might not be the right plant for your location. So make sure that you're thinking about that before you buy a plant. So this picture shows how roots grow from a tree. A lot of times we think that the roots are a reflection of the top of the tree, and that's not true. They like to grow out, so they're actually in the top 26 to 32 inches of the soil. So unlike the picture without the star, most roots are actually in the top part of the soil. So we need to think about that when we're planting a tree, if it's going to be close to a sidewalk or our home or any other infrastructure.
Luckily, there's a publication that K-State Research and Extension provides for you, specifically for our Northwest area, and it will really simplify the process of picking out a tree. It specifies the size of the tree, the right growing conditions, how much water you would need for those trees. So feel free to pick up the preferred list for trees in Northwest Kansas from your local extension office.
So now we're going to be talking about some planting tips. So when you are going to plant your tree, before you start planting it, you want to think about some certain things. So like we talked about, you want to evaluate your surroundings, make sure you're not going to end up like this tree, which had to be severely pruned so it didn't get into some power lines. So think about the mature size of that tree. So even though it's a little baby tree when you buy it, know that it might get a lot larger. Also move and store the tree properly before you plant it. Never carry a tree by its trunk, and make sure it stays in a shaded environment where it's also kept really moist before you plant the tree. When you're planting in Kansas, the best time to plant is either in the spring or the fall, depending on what species it is. Then when you go to dig your hole, make sure it's about 2 to 3 sizes bigger than the pot that the tree comes in. Make sure that the roots aren't tangled or wrapped around. That can lead to a lot of problems. So when you take it out of the pot, make sure you pull the roots apart and separate them really well so they don't girdle the trunk. And then also make sure you're planting at the soil line. We always want to make sure we're planting right at the soil line so that you can see the root flare. It's always better to plant a little bit shallow than too deep.
Like Cassie mentioned, you want to take a moment to separate those roots to break the habit of them circling like they would be in the pot. Mm-hmm. And in this picture, this tree unfortunately only lived for 3 years just because it couldn't reach out and grab the nutrients and water that it needed. So it was really just stuck where it was after it was planted and didn't have a good environment. When you're planting a tree, you want to make sure to backfill that hole that you dug to place the tree in with original soil. It just helps it adapt to the situation as best possible. Also, you want to water that tree in thoroughly and just really get it off to a good start. You'll also want to build a berm or kind of like a trench area around the tree just to help keep that water in right where it needs to be. And yeah, you'll just keep the water where it should be instead of spreading out into the turf grass around your tree where it was planted.
Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about staking trees. Luckily, most trees planted in Kansas, they can go without staking. If you're planting a young tree, don't always assume that you need to put a stake with it. A lot of times they'll be stronger and their roots will grow better without a stake. It does encourage the trunk to move a little bit and the roots will really elongate and thicken. So like this picture shows, you want to make sure that if you do stake a tree, remember to remove it after the first year, or if you don't, the second year is better because they can really damage the tree if you leave them on too long. If you do decide to stake your tree, a few exceptions are if the tree is really large in size. Usually if it's 5 to 12 feet tall, you want to stake a tree. If you're in an area where it's going to experience a lot of high winds, or if it has a weak trunk. Those are conditions where you will want to put a stake on.
So we'll be back in just a few minutes to start talking about mulching, watering, and fertilizing your trees.
Seems like the world is always changing, and like the weather in Kansas, change is inevitable. Mobile technology improves the lives of everyone, not just those living in a city. Nex-Tech Wireless is right there with you, providing expanded LTE coverage for everything from phones to farm equipment. We are devoted to help Kansas work smarter and live better. Nex-Tech Wireless. Time for something different.
At Rogers & Associates Insurance, we serve the Midwest. We offer home, auto, commercial, and farm insurance policies and provide solid options for life and health insurance. For those unexpected life events like hail, wind, deer crashes, fender benders, and the little things in between, we can help you ensure what matters most in your life. Let us help you design a plan that meets your needs and budget. Visit us online or call us at 1-800-569-0118 to learn more.
Welcome back to Caring for Kansas Trees. We're going to jump in and start talking about mulching your trees. So the purpose of mulching is to help reduce competition with existing plants or turf around your tree so it can get the proper nutrients and water that it needs. Often mulch is placed in a circular pattern around your tree unless it's put in an existing bed that has a different shape. And if it's a newly planted tree, that circle should be about 3 to 6 feet around the tree. Or for an existing tree, it could be around a foot or a little bit wider. We really suggest that you use organic mulches. It just helps break down into the soil instead of, for instance, rock will heat up the soil unnaturally and could possibly burn up the roots.
Yeah, so when we think about mulching, a lot of times it's tempting to apply too much mulch. So these pictures are something you want to avoid. We call these the mulch volcanoes. So like Pallace said, we want to make sure that there's a free space around the trunk of the tree, because if we're putting mulch right up to the trunk, it really creates a moist environment that can lead to diseases, extra root growth around the trunk, which can encourage girdling roots. So avoid the volcanoes. Think of mulching like a donut. So you want it in a circle around the tree, only about 2 to 4 inches thick. So not very thick. You don't want a big hill around your tree. So just keep it thin and in a circle around your tree. And then these pictures are really good to show the benefits of mulch. So it is really a good idea to go ahead and put some organic mulch around your newly planted trees, because it really does encourage root growth. So the tree with the star, it really grew more roots because it was planted with mulch versus being planted in a patch of tall fescue. So you can see that the grass really competed with the tree, and it soaked up a lot of the water and nutrients that those tree roots needed. So we really encourage you to create that ring around your tree of a nice organic mulch.
Like we've been emphasizing, water is really important for your newly planted tree. You want to water the tree in its existing pot before you plant it, just so you know it's staying healthy, especially if it's sitting at your home for a few days before you get it in the ground. You also want to water it really well once it's planted in the ground, just to kind of acclimate it to that new environment. And then really keep an eye on it and water it the next day, and then frequently in the upcoming weeks and months to just really help it along, especially if you're planting it in the spring and it's going to be a really hot, stressful summer for that tree. We recommend that you water trees about 10 gallons per week, and we'll show you a handy trick for doing that later in the following segment that you can use a bucket for. When you're watering deciduous trees, you'll want to keep watering them throughout the growing season until it gets to be the point where they're going to drop their leaves in the fall. But you don't want to forget about them in the winter, especially if we're not getting snow. This year we are getting quite a bit of snow, so you probably won't need to keep an eye and water them. But for evergreen trees, you should water them until the soil freezes.
So when you're thinking about watering your young trees, it can really mean the difference between life and death for that tree if it will make it in the first year. So it's really important to water really often and think about how often you're watering, because some people do get a little carried away and tend to overwater. So overwatering causes a condition called wet wilt, and it actually looks very similar to if the tree is too dry, and dry wilt. So be really careful when you're watering, and make sure that you're putting on just the right amount, not too much, and not letting the tree dry out. Like we talked about earlier, turf grass growing under the tree competes for moisture with those roots. So we really encourage mulching around the tree to not only help the roots grow, but also conserve moisture and really keep that tree moist throughout the growing season. For mature trees, they still need water, not quite as much as a newly planted tree, but they like deep, infrequent waterings. So some ways to do that: you can use a soaker hose around the tree base. You can also use 5-gallon buckets with holes drilled in the bottom. This helps to reduce the evaporation rates, and the water is available to the roots longer. We want to think about the soil being wet at least 12 inches deep. So an easy way to check on that is to use like a rod or some kind of dowel post to check how far you can push it into the soil. If your soil is wet, you should be able to push the post down at least 12 inches. If it's really dry, you won't be able to push the rod down very far. So that's a quick way to check if your soil is moist and if your tree is getting enough water.
So now we'll talk about fertilizing. So fertilizing for trees isn't always necessary. First of all, you should do a soil check, and you can do that through an extension office to see what the existing soil situation is for your tree. Otherwise, you should just look for symptoms in your tree. If it's showing yellowing or something like that, often means that it's low on nitrogen or iron. But you could also see symptoms like reduced annual growth or smaller leaves than normal. A tree should often grow about 6 inches per year, a little bit more. So if it's slower than that, or you're not seeing a lot of new leaves branching out this spring, maybe consider fertilizing. But you should avoid fertilizing if it's a newly planted tree. You're going to really stress out those roots by allowing them to grow faster than they should. So unless the soil, again, is in a poor state, you shouldn't fertilize those trees. Mature trees, again, unless they're showing symptoms, don't really need fertilizer. And then once more, we're just going to really recommend that you do a soil test. It isn't an expensive thing to do, and all extension offices offer that.
So when we're thinking about what kind of fertilizer to apply, we usually recommend just a general purpose, slow release fertilizer so that the tree can slowly take up those nutrients as it needs it. But the main thing that trees normally need is nitrogen. That's the main ingredient lacking in our soils. So if you use something high in nitrogen is best because nitrogen is usually in short supply. Phosphorus and potassium are usually pretty high in Kansas soils. When we get our soil test results back, we see that phosphorus and potassium levels are great. It's the nitrogen that needs a little help. So you'll probably be good to apply a little bit extra nitrogen. And the only other thing that might be lacking if your tree is showing symptoms, check on the iron percentage. You might need a little extra iron. But before you start applying a lot of fertilizer, make sure you get that soil test.
Again, we're going to talk about how to apply that fertilizer, so you'll measure the distance from the trunk to the outer branches, which we like to call the drip line. Then you're gonna, whatever that distance is, so like in our equation we have that it was 20 feet from the trunk to the outer drip line. You're gonna multiply that number by itself, so 20 by 20 feet, and then you'll multiply those numbers by 3.14, which will give you your total square foot amount of area that you'll use to cover up with fertilizer. And then you'll want to apply about 1 to 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So if you don't have that much area, you'll want to reduce the amount of fertilizer that you're applying. You can apply fertilizer in several different techniques. One would be with a broadcaster, just like you would use when you're fertilizing your turf grass. There are also pellets that disperse the fertilizer over longer periods of time that you can implement by drilling holes around your tree and then equally dispersing that fertilizer into the holes. The holes should be about 4 to 12 inches deep, depending on the size of tree that you're dealing with, and spaced 12 to 36 inches apart. And then there's also some kind of stakes that have fertilizer in them that you could also use, but really just check the instructions on the back of your fertilizer bag and follow those correctly. We'll be back in just a little bit to finish up our segment on caring for Kansas trees.
Don't let the weather outside interfere with the comfort of your home. Contact AquaShield Roofing and Construction today for all your home repairs, no matter what the season. AquaShield Roofing and Construction specializes in roofing, siding, guttering, insulation, windows, doors, remodeling, and construction. We offer free estimates, and our customer satisfaction is our priority. Don't put off repairs due to the season. Call AquaShield Roofing and Construction today.
Hi, I'm Holly from Nex-Tech. I love all of our services, but my favorite has always been DVR. The convenience of DVR lets me watch my favorite shows on my time, and better yet, with Nex-Tech's TV Now, DVR is free. I also have a new option to watch a movie from the beginning with TV Now's Restart TV, even if it's almost over. TV Now took my DVR to a whole new level. Visit me or anyone at your local Nex-Tech store to upgrade to TV Now.
Welcome back, everyone. We're at the Hayes Research Station, and we're going to be talking about some easy tips you can do for spring. Today is a pretty cold winter day, but these are some awesome tips you can incorporate this spring or summer into your landscape to care for your Kansas trees. So right now we're standing by some crabapple trees, and when we think about plant selection, remember to use Kansas recommended trees. So we want to pick the right plant for the right place. And crabapples are a really good choice for Kansas. This is a Royal Raindrop crabapple. It's a really pretty tree, and you can tell that even in the winter it creates some interest with some red berries, and It's a really great tree for our Kansas environment. So you want to make sure that you're not picking out just your favorite plant or the plant you think is prettiest, but a plant that will do well in our Kansas conditions.
So like we mentioned earlier, some trees need staking. This tree is old enough that it doesn't need a stake, but you will notice that there is a cage around it, and that's mainly because we're at the research station for K-State. They're doing that to protect the bark from deer coming and rubbing up against it, as well as protecting it so it can hold out through the entire research process and not be blown over by the Kansas winds.
All right, so we want to think about mulching now. You can see that this tree has a nice ring around it like we talked about. It doesn't have that mulch volcano. It's a very flat ring, so about 2 to 4 inches of mulch. You want to use a nice organic mulch. So these are bark chips, so they will degrade into the soil, which is really good. You don't want to use like rocks or anything that will heat the soil. When you're looking at the trunk, make sure that you pull away from the trunk so that you're not creating that moist environment around that will create diseases and can encourage girdling roots. So just think about having that ring about 3 feet around the trunk and then keeping the mulch away from the base of the plant.
So when you water this tree, one of the tricks that we talked about was getting a 5-gallon bucket and then drilling a few holes in the bottom. You don't want to make them very big because then it'll let too much water out quickly. But if you fill the entire top and right in here, that'll give you 5 gallons of water, and you'll want to do that twice per week. Another method that you could use is using a soaker hose and just wrapping it in a circle around the drip line. So like we mentioned earlier, drip line is anywhere from the edge of the trunk out to the outermost branches out here. So this tree, it's not a huge drip line, but on a larger tree you'd have a lot more surface area to fill with that soaker hose. And then with fertilizing, kind of the same thing. If this tree did need fertilizing, if you were using a broadcaster, you would display some fertilizer in between the trunk and the outermost branches. Or if you're going to drill holes, you'd go in a circle around where all these outermost branches are. But this tree right now probably wouldn't need any fertilizer, so it's doing pretty well.
Okay, so we want to go over our top 5 tips from this program. So the first thing we've said quite a few times is use the right plant for the right place. That's the key to successful plants in Kansas. Don't plant your tree too deep. That really encourages girdling roots. And can really just start your plant off bad. So make sure that you plant the tree right at the soil line so that you can see the root flare. Avoid over mulching. These trees are mulched perfectly, so use the right amount. Don't put on those volcanoes. Water, especially if it's a dry winter, make sure you're watering even your evergreen trees. And fertilize only if your tree is showing symptoms. So if your tree is starting to look sick, take a soil test and see what's going on and then apply some fertilizer. So if you have any questions about your landscape trees or how to perfect them, come to your local extension office. We have a lot of great publications and we can help you out. So thanks for joining us today. Again, my name is Cassie Homan. I'm a horticulture agent for the Post Rock District.
And my name is Pallace and I'm the horticulture agent for the Golden Prairie District. Thanks so much.